Debunking the malinformation, Ukrainian drone strikes are just a temporary inconvenience. Foreign Policy has published many insightful think tank opinions on Russia and the illegal war conducted by Russia in Ukraine. However, I take substantial issue with a recent publication that purports Ukrainian drone strikes have minimal effect. The article was published by a so-called energy expert, Sergei Vakulenko, from Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center. The article suggests that while the drone strikes are a boost to Ukrainian morale, they have little effect on Russia's oil revenues. In April 2023, the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center opened in Berlin, Germany. The center focuses on major policy challenges across the wider region in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It is home to the digital publication Carnegie Politica. The current director of the center is Alexander Gabuev. Key points in the publication. So far this year, Ukraine says that it has successfully attacked more than 30 Russian oil installations, some deep inside Russia. The latest estimates are that about 17% of Russia's, admittedly ample, oil refining capacity has been damaged to some extent by the strikes. But more broadly, Russia continues to export huge volumes of oil and even a fair bit of natural gas, ensuring that oil revenues continue to fuel its war machine. In some ways, the energy fight is an adjunct to the fight on the battlefield. Ukraine's ability to damage, even for short periods of time, Russian refineries and fuel depots is meant, in part, to undermine logistics for the Russian army, which continues to occupy large swaths of southern and eastern Ukraine. Blowing up expensive installations deep inside Russia is also a psychological boon for Ukraine, which has been largely on the back foot since early 2022. Russia's systematic destruction of the Ukrainian electric power grid, meanwhile, is meant to undermine civilian morale and resilience ahead of winter. The White House had initially warned Kyiv not to strike Russian oil installations, fearing Russian reprisals as well as an inconvenient spike in oil and gasoline prices ahead of the US election, but Ukraine has plowed ahead regardless, just as it did with the Kursk incursion. The big question is, do all the eye-grabbing explosions at refineries and fuel depots make much of a difference to Russia's surprisingly resilient oil-based economy? But the damage done is brief and relatively easy to repair, said Sergei Vakulenko, an energy expert at the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center. Will it make drastic impacts on Russian oil revenues? Probably not. The drones cannot do what the sanctions were unable to achieve. In some cases, Vakulenko said, the oil installations that Ukraine is targeting, chosen because they are within easy range of drones, may not be the critical marks that Kyiv imagines. Many of the older refineries in western Russia were built to take advantage of export customs loopholes that made it more beneficial to export barely refined oil products, even very low-quality ones, than to export regular crude. These aren't the crown jewels, but the cracked zircons. The benefits of hitting those refineries may not be what the Ukrainians thought, said Vakulenko, who was previously an oil executive at Russian and international companies. Debunking this view. This report smacks of a biais from the start, showing a reluctance to recognize the facts or credit the real and wider impact drone strikes have on Russia. This biased opinion is highlighted from the outset, where the author says 17% of Russia's oil refinery has been damaged, to some extent, and, admittedly ample. To admit something reluctantly has strong overtones that the opposite is about to be argued, and true to form, the article then sets out to minimize the perceived impact of drone strikes on Russia oil infrastructure. Challenging the analysis. The assertion is that oil installations being targeted are within easy range of drones, is misleading. In fact, a growing number of attacks are penetrating deep into Russia. For example, Reuters reported on May 9, 2024, a Ukrainian drone struck a major oil processing plant in Russia's Bashkiria region on Thursday from some 1,500 kilometers (932 miles) away, its longest-range such attack since the start of the war. The Kyiv source said the drone flew 1,500 kilometers, calling it a record, and hit a catalytic cracking unit in an attack that showed Russian refineries and oil depots serving the military complex cannot feel safe even in the deep rear. While the article published on Foreign Policy Com suggests hitting a catalytic cracking is of little consequence and easily repaired, tries to diminish the effects of ordinary Russians and oil refinery employees having their businesses attacked in the plain sight of day 1,500 kilometers from the nearest Ukraine border. In terms of the impacts of the drone strikes, the suggestion the impact is minimal sounds like a Kremlin playbook response. Ukraine has stepped up its drone attacks on oil processing facilities in Russia since the start of the year, disrupting 15% of Russia's oil refining capacity according to an estimate by a NATO official at the beginning of April. 15% of Russia's refining capacity of 5.2 million barrels per day. According to Bloomberg, Russia refined 5.2 million barrels of oil per day on average in April 2024, compared to 5.5 million in January. This the equivalent of 780,000 barrels per day of refined oil income. Hydrocarbonprocessing.com reported that Russia's primary offline oil refining capacity has been raised by 114% from the previous plan to 4.1 million metric tons for June, mainly due to last month's stoppages at the Tuapse and Komsomolsk plants, Reuters calculations show. Reported, in May, idle capacity stood at 3.8 MMT. The Russian oil refining industry has been targeted by Ukrainian drone attacks. Technical outages have also contributed to idle capacity. Russia and Ukraine have both used drones to strike critical infrastructure, military installations and troop concentrations in their more than two-year conflict, with Kyiv hitting Russian refineries and energy facilities in recent months. According to the current plan, which is likely be revised upward, the offline refining capacity in July is seen declining to 1.8 MMT, according to Reuters calculations based on data from industry sources. To suggest the impact of the drone strikes on Russia's oil refining capacity is just a psychological boon, with minimal, temporary or of no consequence, is misleading and factually incorrect. Targeting catalytic cracking units, a description that tries to characterize the drone strikes result in minimal effect. Ukrainian drones also struck two oil depots near the town of Anapa in Russia's southern Krasnodar region, causing large-scale fires. Russian authorities said a Ukrainian drone attack caused a fire and damaged several oil tanks at a refinery in Krasnodar region. About 6 drones were destroyed, but debris fell on a facility near the village of Yurovka, sparking a fire, they wrote on the Telegram messaging app. Russian propaganda really admits to targets and damage, but again, the suggestion the drone strikes targeting catalytic cracking equipment being at most a temporary inconvenience is a Kremlin disinformation line. Here they have admitted to damaging several tanks and debris falling on a nearby village, which would have been distressing to Russians who thought they would not end up on the front end of the war, especially since Putin promised Russians he would protect them and has failed to do so. The impact of the Ukrainian drone attack on August 18, targeting an oil depot in Russia's Rostov region, set fire to some 20 diesel fuel tanks with an estimated volume of 5,000 cubic meters of fuel each. A second attack 5 days later, when the original fires had still not been extinguished, targeted the kerosene tanks. A day earlier, Eto Rostov Novosti warned about the potential explosion of kerosene tanks at the Proletarsk oil depot, describing it as much more dangerous than diesel fires that have been raging at the facility for almost a week. The fire was reportedly approaching the kerosene tanks, raising concerns about a possible explosion that could surpass previous ones in power. This one attack alone demonstrates the flawed assumptions and analysis suggesting the drone strikes do not impact the Russian oil infrastructure in any meaningful way. To emphasize this, reports have been published in the Rostov Gazeta, which wrote that oil depot owners in Rostov Oblast are rushing to sell their assets due to threats of new attacks from Ukraine. The number of advertisements for such facilities increased after the drone strikes on the fuel storage in Proletarsk. Several oil depots and refineries in the region, including those in Volgodonsk, Azov, and Matveyev-Kurgan, are now up for sale, according to the publication. Does this sound like the minor inconvenience the foreign policy publication suggests Ukrainian drone strikes are? Among the latest targeted oil depots in Russia were those in Gubkinskaya, Belgorod Oblast, on the 5th of August, a facility near Kamensk-Shakhtinsky, Rostov Oblast, on the 3rd of August, and in Polvaya, Kursk Oblast, on the 27th of July. Ukrainian drones have conducted a nighttime attack on the Gubkinskaya oil depot in Russia's Belgorod Oblast on 3 August, resulting in explosions and a fire at the facility. On the same night, Ukrainian drones also attacked the Russian airbase Morozovsky in Rostov Oblast, where enemy air defense systems, aviation equipment, and warehouses with KAB aerial bombs were located. Additionally, another oil depot was struck in Rostov Oblast. Both Rostov attacks reportedly caused fires. This attack was clearly not an inconvenience to the continued operation of the facility now, was it? The oil depot was reported to have been consumed by fire for the fifth consecutive day following a drone attack on August 22, 2024. The number of injured firefighters has risen to 47, according to Russian media reports. U24 also reported, locals have expressed frustration, claiming that the authorities have neglected them and that federal channels are silent about the crisis. If the strikes are a so-called psychological boon, how come this opinion does not address the psychological arsenal kicking they have on Russian citizens who thought they were invulnerable under the indicted war criminals protection? As for minimal damage being inflicted by drones, this strike has consequences that cannot be masked by flippant opinion or Kremlin narratives. The fire has caused a column of flames to reach up to 10 meters high, filling the air with a pervasive odor and covering the area in ash. Radio Svoboda has released satellite images showing the Rosreserva oil depot fire, which has been burning for 5 days. OSINT analyst MT_Anderson reported that 14 fuel tanks were completely destroyed, 4 were partially destroyed, and 16 remained intact. The status of the remaining 44 tanks is unknown due to the thick layer of smoke obscuring them. Additionally, the Ukrainian Navy destroyed the last remaining Russian railway ferry in the Kerch Strait, significantly degrading Russian fuel logistics for occupied Crimea. The latest targeted Russian air bases were Volgograd's Marinovka on the 22nd of August, Savizlivka on the 16th of August, Lipetsk on the 9th of August, and Rostov's Morozovsky on the 6th of August. Also, Ukraine continues to target Russian air defense assets to remove more threats for its recently received F-16 fighter jets. Conclusion: to suggest Ukrainian drone strikes have minimal effect and are a hollow response in a tit-for-tat exchange between Russia and Ukraine is naive at best, and downright asinine at worst. A misleading and biased opinion.